My name is Ajit Tripathi. I'm a director in PwC's FinTech practice. And it's my honor and privilege to be hosting an eminent panel of legal experts today to talk about the legal implications of blockchain technology. And we're going to cover a number of topics. But to introduce, I would request our panelists to introduce themselves briefly. Steban, starting with you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Esteban van Goor. I work for Baker & McKenzie, and I'm based in Amsterdam. I'm a tax lawyer. I focus on e-commerce, so I have a lot of big e-commerce clients. Next to that, I also write a PhD in relation to iGaming and include virtual currencies, of course, in it because it's a good combination.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sally Sverre-Tate. I'm a partner with Clyde & Co., which is a British law firm. My background is I'm an ex-regulator. I've also worked in-house as head of compliance and head of legal.
Good morning. My name is Brian Klein. I'm a former federal prosecutor. I do civil litigation and criminal defense. I've been involved in this space since about 2013. Represented people like Eric Voorhees. I'm outside litigation counsel to Zcash. And I volunteered as the outside general counsel to the Bitcoin Foundation. And so I have a lot of diverse array of clients in the US and globally with issues, litigation-related issues.
Good morning. I'm Veronica McGregor. I'm a fintech lawyer with Goodwin Procter in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I guess I specialize in helping mostly technology companies navigate the patchwork of state and federal law in the US. But I do some international work as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we have a lot of topics to cover and only 45 minutes to go today. So we'll start with a little bit of an introduction to the topic. So this topic has many dimensions. And there is an open source community out there that is continuously and furiously innovating, but isn't always aware of the existing financial market law or securities law and law around digital signatures. There is a belief out in the market that code can adequately represent law, and there is no further legal contract paperwork is required. There are laws governing digital signatures. There is the status of cryptocurrency in different jurisdictions, and so on and so forth. So we're going to cover all of those topics today. And then there is the topic of financial crime and litigation, and how we can derive some inferences from past regulatory actions or legal precedents to guide the open source community or blockchain innovators in the future. So Steban, starting with you, you have spent a lot of time on virtual currencies from a tax perspective, but I would like to open a broader question, which is, so the status of digital currencies is not clear, right? Cryptocurrencies, as in some jurisdictions treat these as commodities, some jurisdictions treat those as currencies. Yeah. How do you see that today, and how do you see that legal landscape evolving in the future?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I mean, I've been involved for a while already, and discussions there is like, especially like in the tax area, so I'm a tax lawyer, the question there always is like, okay, how do you treat virtual currencies? Do you see it as, for example, a service? Do you see it as a good, or do you treat it comparable to a legal tender? In that respect, I think, for example, within the European Union, we saw a great case. It's the Hedwig case, which was ruled by the European Court of Justice. And the European Court of Justice there ruled that virtual currencies is comparable to means of payment. And in that respect, from a VAT perspective, it should be treated comparable to an actual legal tender, and that's a good thing. I think that especially within the European Union, that moves to the discussion on whether or not virtual currencies should be treated comparable to actual legal tender, to currencies. In other jurisdictions, so on a global level, you see less movement in that respect, but I do think it's really important to have discussions with governments going on that in order to get more clarity or whether or not there is an actual comparison in that respect.
And Sally, your thoughts?
From a regulatory perspective, it's something that regulators are grappling with. You can see that in Europe, the position has kind of been taken also with capturing it under the money laundering regulations. it is used as a bill of exchange. So from that perspective, it is equivalent to a currency from its intrinsic nature. US is different.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the U.S., and Veronica does more of the regulatory compliance work, that the agencies in the U.S., whether the SEC or CFTC or FinCEN or the IRS, the taxing authority, they like to define it in the way most advantageous to them in fulfilling their mission, not surprisingly.
Right. So yeah, in the U.S.
No one likes to think like, oh, we can't regulate or enforce actions related to this. And so I think what's interesting there is, things started out relatively simple with Bitcoin, and now you've got a lot of new ideas and tokens or different types of digital assets that even stretch those boundaries further. And I think you see regulators trying to get up to speed or learn about them, and then also figure out how they can shoehorn it into their mission.
No, I was just going to sort of double down on that, which is in U.S. particularly, regulation abhors a vacuum. So if it's something out there, then every agency, you would think, since most of them are strapped budget-wise, they would sort of happily give away jurisdiction to other agencies. But that's not certainly been the case with virtual currencies and blockchain technologies. Well, blockchain is a whole lot less regulated or even sort of discussed than virtual currencies, is much more farther along. But we've got all the agencies. Is it a commodity? Is it a security? Is it property?
Yeah.
Is it what?
So I believe it was the CFTC that ruled Bitcoin as a commodity and should be regulated as such. Mm-hmm. What are the implications of regulating, let's say, Bitcoin as commodity instead of currency? What does that mean for our audience or for entrepreneurs? What do they have to worry about?
Well, yeah. So if it's a commodity, then there's a licensing thing. You have to be licensed in order to deal in commodities, just as if it were a security, and not the same license.
But I think it depends on your activity.
Yeah.
So not everybody who's using these technologies is going to fall under that scope of regulations. I think the other thing, though, generally people should think about is the way people are embracing these technologies, they're global. And a lot of people think, oh, I'm in this country or that country, and so I'm not in the US, so hey, I'm not covered by the US law. Well, US does not think like that. They think, oh, you're global, and we are going to enforce.
We're part of the globe.
Yeah, we're part of the globe, and you have a website, and U.S. citizens can access that.
Exactly.
So therefore, we can enforce our actions against you, and they will. There is essentially most agencies, particularly law enforcement agencies, view themselves as having a global reach and the resources to pursue people globally. So, you can be very far afield in a way. Whether in China or Eastern Europe, but you can still be very much covered by U.S. regulations and subject to enforcement actions.
Yeah.
I could give a concrete example of that, actually, which is in today's real-life example. So we all know about how there's been lots of sanctions in the U.S. for breach of AML legislation. So what that has done in the rest of the world is that the U.S. banks don't do clearing for any institutions that are in high-risk jurisdictions. So then bringing in the virtual currencies into AML means that that's also going to happen. So that in itself is a risk for the development of the currencies.
Yeah, and on Bitcoin, you don't have KYC, right? It's supposed to be a pseudonymous currency. So how do you know you're sending money to Iran or North Korea? And what are the implications of sending money to someone you don't even know who might be under the OFAC sanctions list?
But from the U.S. law, to get into the system, you have to use an exchange to get into the system or to get out of the system, and we do have AML laws in place for the exchanges. So to take fiat currency and turn it into virtual currency, unless you're mining it, but there's not a lot of.
I want to push on this. Sorry, please go ahead.
I think in the European Union, for example, what you see, I think Germany started already, 2013. They published a paper that they treat Bitcoin comparable as e-money. So I had clients who were based in Germany, and they contacted me and said, like, hey, can you help me set up business in the Netherlands? Because if I want to do business in Germany, I have to pay 800,000 euros for a license, and that's not something I want to do right now. Maybe in the future, but not right now. And what you see in the European Union is that EU member states treat it currently differently, and that of course causes a lot of legal uncertainty. And I always compare this area with iGaming. I don't know if people are aware with the term iGaming, but the neat word of gambling. And in 2008, if you would look at the European landscape, it was pretty unregulated. People could do whatever they wanted. Operators could do whatever they liked. And then EU member states started regulating iGaming, and there's no clear directive for it, so no clear guideline on the European level, and a lot of legal uncertainty. And I think if I always compare these two areas because I see the same happening, at least that's from my perspective, in the future for virtual currencies, that countries will regulate within the EU.
So, I mean, let's make this a bit more practical for our audience, right? So if I'm using a Coinbase wallet on my iPhone and some random guy from Iran sends me money, I mean, am I at risk? Can I be in a US jail? Orange is the new black?
Where's your wallet?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of variables in that. I mean, I think Coinbase will try to stop you from receiving money from Iran, so they have to comply with OFAC.
Right,
Okay.
they would have to, whoever's sending the money has to also have Coinbase
they have to
account.
sign up.
And they can't get a
Right.
Coinbase account,
Okay.
presumably because of the AML and OFAC restrictions.
But then you can have wallets that are in other countries where actually, or at least managed by other operators.
I see. So they're going to check the IP addresses and do a little bit of KYC. You're uploading your documents. So it's important to use one of those applications that have at least a semblance of KYC on them.
And just
Right.
real quick for the audience, in case people don't know, AML is anti-money laundering, and KYC is know your
Know your
customer.
client. Right.
And those are basic functions that financial institutions have to perform in most jurisdictions to comply with the laws to stop money laundering or to stop people from using money for illicit purposes. I think, though, that lost in this conversation a little bit, is that there's a lot of things you can do with these technologies that aren't covered by regulations, that are perfectly legal. And I think a lot of the areas people are really moving into, which is embracing the blockchain technologies, those aren't necessarily all regulated by these rules. You know, if you're building an internal blockchain at your company to manage identity, logistics, whatever, that may not be something that's going to be considered money transmittal. That may not be something that's covered by all this stuff. So,
Smart contracts.
yeah, smart
Smart
contracts.
So, I mean, I'm frequently asked, how is blockchain going to be regulated? And my answer is always, it depends on what you're doing with it.
Yeah. So let's get on to the topic of smart contracts, right? Smart contracts. So contract law has a certain structure to it. And a lot of, I think, enthusiastic open source colleagues of mine believe that smart contracts or code can be sufficient to enforce a contract, a commercial contract. I'm not going to go into code as law just yet. We'll come to that a bit later. But is it possible to write a smart contract on an Ethereum public blockchain that's effectively an enforceable contract between two parties without any paperwork signed?
Well,
It depends on the subject of the contract.
I think smart contracts are neither smart nor contracts.
Right, the
So
computer program.
You heard
it's a
it.
misnomer to call them that. It sounds nice and it's a good catchphrase. But I think, yeah, it's a piece of programming language that people have decided that is going to execute and do something. I mean, we have those things all over the place.
The easiest way to think about it is that it is a self-executing program. So
Yeah.
the parties agree to something, and then that program self-executes it when the parameters are clear. And this is where its application today is possible when you don't have too many permutations. So then it's trigger A, then trigger B. So if I receive the merchandise, the payment gets triggered. That's a really simple parameter, and you can potentially do it.
Yeah.
But if you complicate things, like receiving several goods based on certain other triggers, then it becomes a lot more complicated.
So there is no precedent in common law just yet, right? Where I can say, I signed up for a smart contract because it was on the Ethereum blockchain and I had an address and I was using the smart contract, and then I went to a court because something didn't quite work out. We'll go to the DO in a few minutes. That's a whole other can of worms. And then I went to the court and there was a dispute and the court ruled in the favor of the person who actually created that smart contract. There is no such precedent right now. Yeah. So what's the legal status of smart contracts?
Well, I think in the US, which is a common law system like the UK, there's always analogs, and crafty, creative lawyers can always come up with ways to work with existing laws to enforce people's rights or to defend their clients. So I think this idea that a lot of times there's sort of this world of, it used to be called Bitcoin magical thinking, and now we call it blockchain magical thinking, where it's like, oh, we've got something new and innovative, therefore the law doesn't know how to deal with it, therefore we don't have to be, the law is not going to,
Therefore, there is no law.
Yeah, there
It's
is no
not how it
law.
works.
And as a lawyer, obviously I make my money and my livelihood in for helping people deal with the law. But I think that's just not true, even if I wasn't a lawyer. And I think that's where people can get hung up, is not still seeing, even in the smart contract. Yeah, if you sign up for something, it's like anything else in life. If you sign up for something, think you're agreeing to something, and it doesn't quite work out the way you wanted to, people sue over that. That happens every day.
Yep.
And I don't know why that would be any different with a smart contract.
It can't be. There's too many variables. You can receive the goods and get the payment can go, but the goods aren't what you actually thought you were getting, or there's going to be there's going to be dispute no matter what.
I think it's also
in some
important to
cases.
take into account like what parties actually want to achieve with the smart contract. So, for example, coming from a non-common law country, so the Netherlands, if there's a will to do something, so if we do a verbal agreement, then in principle it can already apply. And I think with smart contract, if we agree that I sell you X for X amount of money,
So it can be an enforceable contract under civil law, is that what you're saying?
in my view,
Yeah.
I think it can, especially because you have the will, but it really depends on what type of agreement you have, of course, and yeah.
But the agreement is in the code,
No.
right?
No, the agreement is in the agreement. So an agreement
So
is
when
a
does the
verbal.
agreement
An
happen?
agreement is a verbal agreement first and foremost, which is written down for the purposes of documenting what the parties agreed, and then proving it. So whether that becomes codified versus written is just a form of documenting the contract.
But there is no paperwork. When I when I sign up, when I download the Ethereum client and start using one of the smart contracts that's been deployed, there is no paperwork. There's no written or verbal. I don't even talk to somebody who deployed the
The code is written. She doesn't mean
Code is
actually
written.
written.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
the code that's written, not. Yeah.
So if, let's say the DAO, we'll come to the topic that everybody wants to hear about. In case of this, the DAO was a smart contract that was structured as a decentralized autonomous organization. The philosophy was that it's possible to create a company without any charters or governing documents, and that company can be deployed as a smart contract on a public blockchain. And then the code itself will enforce the governing principles for this investment vehicle, which is essentially drawing cryptocurrency investments from other participants. And then now that's a can of worms in so many different ways, and I will spend 5 minutes on that. So, but speaking of this as a contract, right? What's the legal status of such an organization in Europe and in the U.S. of a decentralized autonomous organization? Is that a valid investment vehicle or company or anything at all?
Right. Well, that's one that you have to consider. So first of all, where is it? If it is located anywhere from a jurisdiction perspective.
And how would you decide that based on the IP address?
There are different jurisdictional links, and that usually depends on the country and how the country's current legislation decides that. So it's actually not an easy question to answer.
All right.
Then is it a company in the first place? That's another question.
That's another question.
Yeah.
Well, I know that anything you say here is not legal advice, and I'm the only non-lawyer, so hopefully I won't get arrested for unauthorized practice of law by, but still pushing this a little bit. What do you really think without providing any legal opinion?
I think based like on IP address, it's also really hard because like we have the same discussion in VAT law, and it's IP address. You can also tweak it. I mean, use a VPN or a proxy server, and
so whose
somewhere
jurisdiction applies? Is it the jurisdiction? I know that I spent a year and a half doing Volcker rule implementations for banks, so U.S. law applies everywhere, and I'm sure we British have some feelings about that.
Who are the participants? I think is
Right.
one of
Who's
the.
going to sue who to begin
Right,
with?
exactly.
That's generally how they end up trying.
Basically.
So I think please speak to our audience. So what do you think? Which jurisdiction might apply in a case where money gets stolen from the DAO and people are, this could be mom and pop's money, not some hacker's money from the basement, and there is a consumer that needs to be protected.
As a litigator, you would probably start looking, first of all, as to which judges are more favorable to what you're going to be asking for.
I see. So the lawyers get
Forum
to decide
shopping.
where to go
Forum
and
shopping
sue.
for sure.
Right.
I think law
need to watch more
enforcement or
TV.
the regulators would look,
Right.
are the victims, alleged victims, in our jurisdiction, right? If they're all somewhere else, there's not a greater
It's
incentive
the
to go after.
jurisdiction where the victims are that's more
Yeah,
relevant than. Okay.
But also, and then where are the actors as or participants on both sides? Where do they live? Where are they located?
I see. So if a U.S. person is affected, for example, then U.S. law generally can be applied.
Well, that's certainly a try.
Can be stretched to
Can be
apply.
stretched to apply.
Yeah.
But I also think, though, that regulators were just starting to get their arms around, digital currencies, Bitcoin, even Ether, and now you've got this whole thing with the DAO. It's just looking like blowing people's minds, literally.
Indeed. That's one way to put it.
And it's so small still. I mean, there's such a small amount of transaction volume, relatively speaking, over the Bitcoin network, even over Ethereum, that these things are still, people are still trying to hash this out. I mean, if lawyers who think about it all the time and have clients paying them, aren't coming up with simple solutions, government, which usually is behind the curve, is going to be further behind, and they're going to struggle with these things more than anybody else. I think it's really important for the people in the community, and the businesses, the leaders, the academics, to try to help educate government, work with government so they understand these things, so hopefully we get a smarter set of laws.
Yeah. So I'll push, sorry, please go ahead.
Just a couple more things. So I'm currently working one smart contract. And maybe that could be a different way of addressing it if you're, just to give a practical perspective, if you're thinking about doing something that is similar. So what we started out doing with my client is that we started out with the written agreement.
Yeah.
And then we write into it the execution element of it. So things that are uncertain, like jurisdiction, you can address right at the beginning by doing something like this. And you have to do this because there is no legal framework. So, and the most important thing between the parties or between any venture is certainty, legal certainty of which law you'll be captured into, which jurisdiction you'll be under. So that's one way of addressing it if you want to do it today. The second thing is that if the regulatory process is by definition retrospective. So, and that's a good thing.
If something blows up, we fix it.
But that's a good thing. That's
Right.
a good thing because the technology is still bedding down. We're seeing new products all the time. The blockchain has lots of new use cases all the time as well. It's good that the regulators don't just jump the gun and try to capture it under a certain category. And sometimes they do. The US is an example of that. Because then you're pushing and trying to enforce a regulation which is inappropriate to a new situation.
Yeah, I mean, Veronica, so it's beautiful to cross-examine lawyers. I rarely get that opportunity. Right. So, I mean, there is the economic substance of the transaction, right? So there is extensive law, especially in the securities space, especially starting with the 1934 Act around raising funds and issuing securities and so on and so forth. Now, the DAO, essentially it was an investment vehicle, wasn't it? Because you were essentially raising money from consumers. But somehow the SEC didn't stand up and say, hold on, these guys are issuing securities. And that's the first thing I tweeted when this thing came out. And I didn't hear about any action from any regulator. And Brian and Veronica, why do you think the US regulators are silent on this?
Well, I don't think we can jump to a conclusion that just because you haven't heard from a regulator that they're being silent or that law enforcement isn't paying attention. I mean, oftentimes we read about a bank blowing up or a financial institution or some sort of fraud scheme, and you don't hear about arrests the next day, and you go, well, where's law enforcement? Why didn't they arrest this person the next day? Well, they're working and they're trying to do their job in a diligent manner and trying to get their arms around the situation. So a lot of times, and I represent lots of clients who either are witnesses or subjects or targets of investigation, and they're non-public.
Right.
Because they may not always lead to someone being arrested. And you wouldn't want the government to jump out and say, we're investigating you for this crime, and that's all over the news, and then 6 months later they're like, yeah, we're dropping it. It's a little bit like sort of the Hillary Clinton thing.
What just happened with the FBI
Right.
and Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Because you never know what is happening behind the scenes. They're not supposed to, investigations aren't supposed to be public knowledge that they're happening. because of that very thing that we've got.
So if I'm a cryptocurrency entrepreneur, I could easily get a call from FinCEN or someone else, and I may have no clue why I've been called by a U.S. Enforcement
Yes.
agency, right?
Absolutely.
You'll probably get an email or a
That's
letter
scary.
Right.
in the mail,
Right.
and you'll be like, "Oh, this is a real shame," and you'll open it up, and your heart will beat a little harder, and then
A little bit
you call
harder,
Brian.
yes.
You
And
call
then you'll
Brian.
And then I'll move to
You call
you
Bali.
Brian.
call a lawyer, and they hopefully help guide you through the process, and it hopefully goes away.
Right.
So
But,
what
you
do
know,
I need to do as an entrepreneur? If I'm a cryptocurrency entrepreneur or a blockchain entrepreneur, what do I need to do? Hire one of you guys? And
At what point? So
Right.
you hire me before you get the letter, right? When you're still putting your business together, you hire someone like me to help you navigate the laws and regulations around what you're doing and help you issue spot and find out what, I don't mean hire me. I mean saying like someone like me.
It's getting pretty expensive
right.
pretty soon,
It is.
right, Esteban?
And then if you get a letter, you hire Brian.
It's too late.
yeah,
What I also think, like, we're speaking about a lot about regulatory, but there's also a tax perspective. I mean, I'm a tax lawyer,
tax, indeed.
but then also, like, yeah, for DAO, like,
You have
okay,
to pay
where,
taxes on
yeah, where,
cryptocurrency? Right.
yeah, like, there's also difference in that. So, for example, in the Netherlands, if you own Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency, you should actually report it as taxable income. And of course, like with the DAO, you have the same discussion. So where is it taxable? Where is it based? So which jurisdiction has the authority to levy?
Okay, so I need to pay taxes on my wallet before I come back to the next question. Anyways,
but I think your point is, I think, in Veronica's point, I'm stealing her line from earlier when we were talking outside, is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So, you know, it makes sense when you're starting a business to consult with a financial person and an attorney, and you do those things in good faith, and you get some advice, and then you can proceed. I mean, it's better to go early than go late. The government doesn't really believe in the principle of it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission.
so ignorance
easier to
of
get
the
forgiveness
law,
and permission.
ignorance of the law is not an excuse, right?
True. And
If I can
Yeah.
compare it, I mean, as I said, like I have a lot of e-commerce clients, and a lot of my clients are in the sharing economy. So they started small, and then all of a sudden they went huge.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, so what's the tax treatment, and specifically like indirect tax, so VAT treatment? How is that going to hurt me? And a lot of companies, they don't think about it. A lot of people, they don't think about it. But in the end, it can kill your business just like that. If you have one of the authorities saying, okay, you're established here, you should have paid VAT. We're going to go 5 years back. That's 21% on your revenue. You're done.
Yeah. They're not
Like-
doing that to Donald Trump, though. Right.
To quantify it, I mean, it is important to quantify it because I know that everybody thinks, okay, you talk to a lawyer, you're going to be broke. It's not necessarily going to help your business, and ultimately, well, let's see if the business works in the first place. It actually doesn't have to be that expensive.
Okay.
So a lot of the times, because I deal with a lot of startups, and
Yeah.
a lot of the times it is really simple. Let's just get 10 hours max of brain time, of discussions, of brainstorming, of is this something that I really shouldn't look at? Structuring your business, thinking about where you should, even your operational processes, your regulatory processes, it's not necessarily that expensive, and that saves you a lot of money down the road.
Especially if you're going to be programming. You gotta-
Exactly.
I mean, that's the thing is I've had so many
Exactly.
clients come to me and I'm like, yeah, so here's the deal.
No.
You need to unwind what you did because you have to insert a disclosure here, or you have to do this. And I don't like telling them that. So if they just go to a lawyer early, then they can have the issues that they're going to face ahead of time, and they can not have to, before they program stuff, before they do a soft launch,
So
before
this
any of that
is-
stuff.
Yeah, this is really, really an important message from this conversation. I mean, I work with a lot of banking clients, less with startups in this space, and all of our, big capital markets and banking clients always have a legal team engaged when they're working with blockchain technology because they are particularly aware of the regulatory implications, have large compliance functions and legal functions. They're very aware of the legal implications of moving to a different process or using potentially, new technology and the implications and the obligations they have in terms of consumer protection. But I see that a little bit less with entrepreneurs. And as you heard, it's not always that expensive to hire a lawyer as long as you hire them at the right time. If you hire them after the fact, when you've already got the call from FinCEN, like the movie The Accountant, then it's a little bit more expensive.
Maybe you can also do it smart. So like I work a lot with startups, and it's not like my main focus. I mean, I have other clients who are very big and who pay sufficient. But like in the end, I think if you approach a lawyer, it's always good to just speak open about, okay, are you going to charge me for this meeting? Just a very simple example. If you're meeting a lawyer, are you going to charge me? Yes, no. Is this complimentary? Yes, no. And
so let me ask you a different
grow.
question now. So I have friends at Aris Industries, Monax guys, who are saying, they're building legal tech now, and they think that a lot of the law firms' back office will be reduced by some of this technology as we move to legally enforceable smart contracts. And I'll come to the concept of Ricardian contracts. There is a gentleman named Ian Grigg who essentially defined, but let me ask you this. What are Ricardian contracts, instead of me explaining? So these are contracts where there is a preamble which provides the definitions that are being used in the code. And so if you have an insurance contract, for example, it has a bunch of definitions, and then there is the code that essentially enforces the events or processes the events that essentially enforce the substance of the contract, right?
This is the one that's a very complicated one to then do.
This is the one that ISDA and R3 and insurers and everybody else is looking for.
Yeah.
So what they do is Ricardian contracts, using this structure, make smart contracts more enforceable in the eyes of the law?
I think from an execution value on assets getting moving cash, and it probably can be, but again, let's remember that depends on where it happens. If it happens in the derivative world, which is where ISDA is, it's already quite instantaneous. It's not that difficult to implement. You've got marking to market that happens on a daily basis, movement of funds that happen to a daily basis, and movements of assets that happen on a daily basis.
And the contracts are fairly standardized.
Exactly.
Right?
So actually, it's just a different medium to something that is already quite automated.
But I still go to a bank and I see volumes of term sheets. If I see a mortgage, it's a fairly standardized contract. I see lots and lots of paper. If commercial loans, lots and lots of paper. Just you could go on and on. Right, and that paper creates a lot of inefficiency. And the dream for someone like me and for a lot of my technology friends is we want to make this whole thing a lot more frictionless and efficient, right? And that's a worthwhile dream, and because it improves reporting, regulatory compliance, so on and so forth, and you can automate a whole bunch of back office tasks. Now, but what's the catch? What do I need to do to make sure if I'm running a project that involves automating a financial contract and the back office for that contract using smart contract and blockchain technology, what do I need to worry about from a legal perspective?
So I'm working on one today, which is converting a financial instrument into a blockchain technology. So it's a traditional financial instrument. We want to do it, or at least my client wants to do it, in a way that is through blockchain. The things that you have to look at is what's the current process. It's essentially validity and enforceability. Is your contract valid? Yeah. Is your contract valid? Is it going to be enforceable if there's ever going to be an issue?
So they're not the same thing? Validity and enforceability?
She's going to send you a legal bill for this after.
Maybe Mo can.
An actual contract and enforceability is, okay, we assume it's an actual contract. Is it enforceable? Is there a way to make sure that the parties perform?
Can I get my money back? Can I, exactly, something like that.
Okay.
So then you have to look at, and this is where I think it's not clear cut, because there are processes that exist today that exist because we don't have the technology to do something else.
Okay.
Once we have the technology to do something else, even the process itself might change. So that's, and that you don't have a universal answer for this, because you have to look at every instrument and how it's implemented. Efficiencies some things could be a lot more efficient through blockchain, but today you still have to make them fit within contract law of that country, for example. Within the process that is being used by financial institutions to execute that instrument.
So you have to be really careful who you offer the service to, because then wherever the participant is, you have to worry about the law of that particular jurisdiction and making sure that whatever you build complies with the applicable law and regulation in that jurisdiction. So if I create a platform that works in both Germany and England and in France, then I have to be careful before launching it in a particular jurisdiction. Although a lot of this technology works cross-border, right?
Yeah.
So I have to be really careful that I don't offer it to a French guy unless I have verified adherence to the French law,
That's the enforceability
especially
element.
French.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the
After
enforceability
Brexit.
element.
Right.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay.
So again, to give another example, in today's world, although the ISDA document is a standard
What's
document, it's
International
international.
Trade
Yeah.
Derivatives.
Sorry, it's derivative trading, if anybody is familiar with that. It's the reason why the subprime happened. So,
Not their fault.
to some extent. So today the ISDA exists because for years banks were using it, they were perfecting it, they were changing it, they were doing the mechanisms behind it. And the same thing is happening now, but doing it through technology rather than on paper.
Right.
So it's the same process. It's also going to take some time. It's going to take some time with people bedding down the processes, agreeing to the technology, all of the systems linking up to each other. It's not very simple.
Okay. Okay. So we're going to learn by our mistakes.
Basically.
Okay. That's very encouraging. Thank you. So one more question. So a lot of, and this is really important, right? Digital signatures are still not accepted, or cryptographic signatures are one form of digital signature. DocuSign is one user interface, and I can affix a signature, and and there are other
When you
interfaces.
say they're not accepted.
They're not
they are
accepted in all jurisdictions,
Oh, okay.
right? So
In the U.S., a lot
and
of
depending
times you
on
can
whether
use
it's a
those, yes.
commercial contract, so U.S. has different state rules. You have UCC and UETA and so on and so forth.
Not for digital signatures.
Not for
really.
digital
I mean,
signatures. Okay,
we
let me
have
ask you an open-ended question.
We have an a federal Electronic Signatures Act. It doesn't cover every specific type of writing. Like wills and things like that. There are certain things that you still
Have
need
to be notarized.
they have to be notarized and things like that. You still need a wet signature for.
Okay.
But most stuff can be done.
So
with
what cannot be
electronically.
done with digital signatures in the U.S.? Let me just.
Real property transfer still can't be done with electronic signatures. Wills, like
Wills.
but
What about tax rules? So the IRS doesn't always recognize cryptographic signatures on all the tax reporting forms, right?
Well, I don't know why we.
we
I
do
don't-
electronic.
I know
filing
why
all
I'm
the
going
time.
into this because
You-
there are so many regulators that we have to worry
Yes.
about. And as an entrepreneur, how are you going to navigate this?
Well, what I would say is, I mean, the world's obviously moving in the direction of
Yeah.
digital signatures being fully accepted for everything. That's clearly going to happen. It's just a matter of time. So I think that's the trend. And, whether it's one agency or another, they're all going to be caught up and will get caught up in that. Just because the world we live in, that's how people want to do things. I mean, it's ridiculous to have someone go to a spot to sign something when they could just do it just as easily somewhere else, and it's indisputable that they signed it. And in fact, obviously this blockchain technology can help provide some of that verification or build in that trust. So, I think right now we're at this point where the world's moving in that direction, and I think eventually that will be
And
where
what
we
is
all
the
will be.
European point of view on this? Thank you, Brian.
I think, again, it depends. But I think the point that we need to put across is that if you're an entrepreneur, don't get hung up on on things like that. First, identify what your market is, what your jurisdictions are, and then tackle the issues that arise in those jurisdictions first. Where you want to base your business, how your business operates. Do you need the physical signature or not, for example? What kind of information do you need? Do you need to get regulated or not? These are the things that you should think about right at the onset. And sometimes you're surprised because the answers that you get might change where you decide to set up your business. And some regulators are really friendly to certain businesses and not to others. So forum shopping is actually a good thing in today's world, just for these reasons.
Okay. And Mr. Brian?
No, I agree with that.
Tax reporting and digital signatures?
No, like in the end, what you see, like development, for example, in announce, you can actually use a digital signature to file your returns. It's just you need to request for a certain code with the government. In the end, if you get the code, you file your return just like that.
Excellent.
And
Absolute last question. I think we are out of time. Liability. I would love to launch a business that has no liability. It's the best thing one can ever do. It's but that's not an option for most of us ordinary mortals outside of the open source community. So if I'm creating a new business that's built on one of the public chains, Bitcoin or Ethereum or something else, how do I make sure that I'm not sort of holding the liability for the performance of my software? Because with a lot of software that's distributed, let's say Apple software, a lot of software is deployed as is or distributed as is with indemnification for liability. Does that still apply to financial software involving cryptocurrencies, or is that can I not have a piece of paper attached to my smart contract or a commented piece saying, oh, this software is provided as is, not my fault?
Again, it depends. It depends.
That's what I hear from lawyers all the time.
Yeah, but I mean, you can disclaim all the liability you want, and if the law lets you do that, good. But you can also try to pass off liability to other participants in whatever it is you're doing, or if you get sued for something, get indemnified by one of the other parties who's actually the wrongdoer.
And I would say for law enforcement and regulators, at least in the U.S., oddly, well, not oddly, but unfortunately in some level, the smaller the business you are, the smaller the startup, the more they personalize the action. So if you're a huge, massive bank, decision-making is so diffuse, the actors are so diffused, name a bank in the global bank, it's very hard to pinpoint and say, oh, this person's responsible and this person caused that. But when you're a startup, it's like 3 people in a room, right? Or 2 or 1. And it's very easy for a law enforcement to say, no, we're not just going to fine you, we're actually going to arrest you, or we're actually going to personally issue an enforcement action against you personally, so that you can't be involved in this type of activity again. So I think that is a real thing, and that's why I think the advice from...
the little guy, being the little guy is hard.
No, but it's also from a tax perspective, like, did you consult a tax lawyer? Yes, no. If not, why didn't you do that? And then there's also liability involved there.
Of course.
If you consulted a tax lawyer, then yeah.
Thanks. Sally, anything before we close?
We don't mean to make things sound grim, I think is what I'm the closing statement.
Lawyers are often the undertaker at a birthday party. Everyone wants to celebrate, and the lawyer comes in and says, well, you can't really celebrate like this, and you've got to, get rid of the balloons, and there's no cake, and and it depends, and maybe, and let's talk about.
But that's why you need to get someone involved at the outset. And I work with a lot of startups. We all do. And one thing that I know is true is that we tend to have a light pen with the billing with the startups. Because, like, my dad's an entrepreneur. I am very sensitive to that sort of thing. And
great marketing.
Yeah, I'm just saying, look, don't be afraid to ask a lawyer something. Most of the time we'll just give you advice and help you along because we want to.
Thank you.
But I also think one important thing is like governments involve them. I mean, the OECD published a paper about virtual currencies and tax treatment. It's important. I mean, it's already very good that governments are aware of these developments of virtual currencies and blockchain. So make use of that. I mean, if
engage.
Yeah, engage.
With the agencies, right?
Educate them so that they understand.
Right. Exactly. I mean, the FCA does have a sandbox, so they are an approachable regulator, and they will give entrepreneurs. There's a lot of public information that's available in the UK. You can consult with them. They will point you in the right direction. So it is possible to get access to information, to at least know what questions to ask.
And I think the government and regulators and law enforcement, they are equally excited about these things on a level. They want to see them used responsibly, but they're interested because they're like, hey, this is new. We've been doing the same thing for 30 years. Now we got something new we can...
But they have the obligation to do it safely, right, in the interest of consumers. So closing remarks, I have some bullet points here from the conversation. If ignorance of the law is not an excuse, just because we are cool people doing cool things doesn't mean we don't need to follow the law. There is enough precedent outside of cryptocurrency and blockchain where the economic substance of the transaction might be applied. If you're the small guy, it's your liability. Typically, as you don't have the cover of a large corporation, and you have to be especially careful. Engage. If you don't understand the law, hire an expert or engage an expert early. Fourth point was engage with the authorities and the agencies because they are also looking for innovation. They're also looking for ways to govern and manage financial markets or other markets better using new technology. So it's not regulators against the rest of the world. In fact, RegTech is a huge agenda in this country. Last point is it's innovation. I mean, lawyers aren't going away, right? I mean, when I didn't grow up thinking I'll become an auditor. I'm sure a lot of people don't grow up unless they've been watching Boston Legal that they will become lawyers. But at the end of the day, there is a reason we all exist, and we have a role, irrespective of how much innovation happens in cryptocurrencies and other emerging technology. There will always be a role for humans to get involved and resolve disputes. With those, we close this conversation. Thank you so much for listening. Right.